Good afternoon, Brandon.
Hey Beth, how's it going?
Good, good. Well, we're here to do the third of our three-part series on shepherding groups. And so we've covered so far in the first webinar how we would go about building an individual's capability in the arena of the improvement kata, coaching kata. And then our second is the development of a shepherding group and what their role is and how they go about building capacity within their organization to ultimately achieve that embedded meta routine across all levels and in all areas of their organization. Today, what we're going to cover is what are 5 key factors that a shepherding group should be aware of in terms of 5 key factors of success. And this is based, Brandon, on both of our experience over our years working with organizations, embedding this behavior across all levels, all areas. And it's been a learning experience for us. And we want to share these thoughts with the shepherding groups at Baptist. So the 5 key factors, the first one is really about relevancy. And I'll talk to that a bit more deeply in just a moment, but it's relevancy about the challenges that people are working towards. The second one is, do we really have the right people in the right roles? Do we have the right learner, the right coach, the right second coach? Is the alignment proper? Do we have the right shepherding groups members, the right shepherds? The right people in the right roles is a second key factor. The third key factor is close in target conditions. And by close in, I mean in terms of time. We see this a lot with new novice skill level learners and novice skill level coaches. They want to put target conditions way out in front. Somehow I think people get the idea that that's easier if I have a month to work towards it, as opposed to keeping it close in, like an every 2-week target condition. The fourth one is frequent and rapid PDSAs. So we really get great skill and habitualization of this scientific way of thinking and acting. And the fifth one is to make sure we're having purposeful coaching cycles so they're meaningful. And so your shepherding groups, who shepherds and PDSAs your organization development should assure that these factors are in play to really create sustained improvement through an engaged organization. And the shepherding group is striving to achieve a tipping point within the organization. And I talked a bit about this in the last webinar, but we'll talk about it again. It's the tipping point is when kata activities are no longer something extra I have to do, but just the usual thing I do to manage my processes and develop my people. And that's what we're really striving for. A tipping point is a moment that signals the beginning of a dramatic change. It comes out of the work, I'm most familiar with it, out of the work of Malcolm Gladwell. And he asserts that tipping points explain some uncanny phenomenon, usually around a momentum, maybe behind the spread of AIDS or the murder rate in New York City suddenly dropping back in the 90s. Those are some examples he uses in this book. But I think more interestingly, it's the basis of the idea that behaviors and ideas are contagious. In other words, they also have tipping points. And so we want to get our organization to its tipping point around kata. So let's talk about these 5 factors, and we'll start at the beginning. The improvement kata activity must be relevant, meaning it has to be important. It has to be important to the organization. It has to be important to the second coach, has to be important to the coach, and to the learner. If it's not relevant to those entities, it's not going to get the attention that it needs. And as we know, energy flows where attention goes. And so if we have irrelevant challenges out in front of us, meaning they're not critical to the top leadership, it's not relevant to the second coach, the first coach isn't interested or is disinterested, we won't get frequent and deliberate practice. So outcomes are critical. Relevancy comes when the outcomes are critical. Improvement Kata is expanded on critical organizational challenges and processes. Coaches have a vested interest in the outcomes and are held accountable for the results. And learners are the natural process owners and will personally benefit from the improvements achieved. We want to make the shepherding group has to make sure those factors are in play. The second factor is the shepherding group has to decide, do we have the right people in the right roles? And the learner's role is to apply the improvement kata following a scientific model to attain innovative improvements. The coach's role is to teach the scientific model to obtain those innovative improvements. And the second coach's role is to teach coaching kata to the primary coach. So what we have to look at is, do we have the right people in the right roles? The right learner, again, natural process owner. Their coach should be someone who has a vested interest in developing the skill of that learner. And the second coach is there really helping to teach the desired coaching behavior to the primary coach. So the reporting relationship should be considered. The relationship between the learner and the coach and the second coach is a key factor to success. The relationship between a learner and their coach is the basis for the development of people, and the development of people is how day-to-day improvement and innovation are delivered. The coach and learner, the coach must have a vested interest in developing their learner along with obtaining the improvement. The coach is interested in altering the thinking and acting of the learner, resulting in a new mindset. Skill levels as it pertains to the learner, coach, second coach, and the shepherding groups, right? We want to make sure that those roles are interested in pulling their learners, their coach, up their competency scales from novice, advanced beginner to competent, proficient, and eternal learner. The second coach should have a vested interest in developing the management skill of the coach, right? So there should be a relationship between the second coach, and the second coach really needs a vested interest in developing the management skill set of the coach. The third factor, this close-in target condition. Target conditions, particularly with novice learners and coaches, tend to be large and much more complex than they should be. And this leads to large, complex PDSAs, PDSAs that could be target conditions in and of themselves. And so by really the shepherding group reviewing those target conditions, they should assure they are of proper distance into the future, and always they need to make sure that they're aligned to the organizational challenge. Novice skill level target conditions. For novices, target conditions should be set 1 or 2 weeks out, really no more than that. And advanced beginner or competent skill level, process target conditions should be no more than 3 to 4 weeks out. Even with competent skill level, I like to keep a process level target condition just 2 weeks out, if possible. Value stream target conditions or larger, more strategic challenges and target conditions should be no more than 1 to 3 months out. But as you get more strategic in your kata activity, the time frame could extend, but only for advanced, beginner, competent skill level practitioners. Now, the fourth key factor, we want to make sure that our practitioners are doing frequent and rapid PDSAs. And with close-in target conditions, PDSAs do tend to be smaller, single-factor experiments that are performed with laser focus, set on overcoming one obstacle at a time. The flip side of that is, yeah, Brandon?
I was just going to add to that slide there, the frequent and rapid PDSAs. Many times in the beginning, that's difficult for novice and advanced beginner learners, and shepherds should recognize that. For example, they might think they're wanting to make a change on a inpatient med surg floor to the whiteboard. Maybe it's how they're where they have the information, or how the information is communicated, or maybe it's just the position on the board. And I'll see sometimes PDSAs where they will have say, well, we've got to change all 44 boards in all 44 rooms, communicate to all the PCAs and catch all the PRNs, and the coach. We have to coach them sometimes as shepherds and second coaches to say, let's just take 4 rooms and 2 RNs, and let's change those 4 and do a small experiment to see if this is what we want. Is it going to overcome the obstacle to our challenge? And so those thinking small and thinking rapid results, rapid PDCAs to see what our results are, sometimes can be a challenge because we're in the nature of healthcare wanting to solve everything all at once many times.
Yeah. That's a perfect example, Brandon. And we see it, with the training piece in particular. It's like we have to train everyone. It's like, no, we just have to train one and learn how best to train this new behavior, or train this new process, or train this new procedure, and experiment around the how we're training to make sure we're doing that effectively. Exactly. And that's where, as I know some of your teams are, pulling in the job instruction, right? JI, to help find the best way to begin to train. And so that's a great example. Thank you for that. But we want to make sure they're rapid, small PDSAs. And as we talked about in our last webinar, just that 30 minutes, right? What can I do? That's the desired pattern. There may be some days where it just has to be more, but that's not our desired pattern. And with small and frequent PDSAs, one of the things we see is it really keeps learners engaged, because learning and improvements are coming at them at a fast pace, keeping the learner and their teams motivated and engaged in the kata activity. And that means that our coaches are engaged. When fast-paced learning occurs, coaches and second coaches remain engaged and motivated to go and see. As I think you talked about in the last webinar, they go to the Gemba, right? They're excited to do that because they see rapid and significant learning going on, fast-paced learning. On the flip side, if PDSAs are long and learning is happening at a slow pace, coaching sessions lose their allure and their value. It's a slog. It's not rapid learning. The fifth one is purposeful coaching cycles, right? Frequent and rapid PDSAs give purpose to frequent coaching cycles, right? When coaching is going on, when rapid PDSAs, it keeps that coach engaged and it brings purpose to the coaching cycle. If there is no learning after 1 or 2 coaching cycles, again, the idea that coach, maybe we should just wait. I've heard that before. Let's just wait and we'll do a coaching cycle Monday instead of tomorrow, like Tuesday, we'll do it next week, Monday. So you want to get closer in target conditions, bringing us to rapid and frequent PDSAs, and then that pulls us to purposeful coaching cycles. There's a reason to have the coaching cycle. And with that, Brandon, I'm going to turn it over to you. To those 5 factors are key, we've found, to really helping build that sustainable behavior in an organization.
Yeah, Beth, there's one thing I want to also mention, that all 5 factors are very important as we've experienced throughout our coaching careers, but I don't think it's by mistake. Number 1, relevancy is at the top of the list
Yes.
of what you've displayed today. I've experienced that where the challenge became irrelevant to the current working situation. We had a unit that the staffing had suddenly dropped, and it was getting to be a very high stress, very responsiveness was the challenge, and we wanted to continue to respond at a high level, but the staffing was low, and the learner and coach became really disengaged with their PDSAs, and the PDSAs became longer. And so we actually stopped and pulled back as shepherds and as external coaches, said, what is relevant right now to the current working situation we're in? And we actually changed the challenge to something that was more relevant. And it was an immediate 180 turnaround on engagement. And so that is very key and very important. The other thing I liked what you talked about on the reporting relationships is that shepherds need to understand that once we go through this rotation of the learner to coach to second coach, and we've put the natural order of the relationship together. Maybe it's the director as the second coach, the unit manager as the coach, and there's a head nurse as a learner, 2 head nurses on different shifts as learners. That's the natural relationship to develop people and develop leadership, as you were mentioning. It's not to say we can't go back and rotate again and let the unit manager be the learner and improve their learning skills, but we don't constantly rotate. And I wanted to make sure that we talked about that. There's not a continual rotation of the director back into the learner role, but there are some key things and some key factors that help people's development if they do go back into those roles and rotate. So what we're trying to achieve with the Kata, what we're after, we talked about this in the very first video, and we'll recap and summarize some of what we've learned as we've deployed through shepherding groups. Remember, the learner is working on the what. They're working on the obstacles and issues and they may be different every time. The obstacles may vary with the situation. The coach is working on that habitual thinking pattern that remains the same. So the what, the understanding of the current condition and navigating through the unclear territory of the obstacles so that we achieve or arrive at the target condition. That's where we want to be next. The how, I went forward just a little bit too much. The how, it is the learner practicing the routines of the Kata through the development of the habitual thinking patterns, regardless of the complexities of the obstacles and the content of the subject at hand, so that the coach has to understand that they're focusing on the improver's development, regardless of the what. It's the how we get there and the thinking pattern behind the card that's important. So as long as we keep these 4 steps, which are the basic 4 steps of the improvement Kata: understand the direction, grasp the current condition, then we establish the next target condition and understand the obstacles, keeping us from being able to operate in that pattern, and then iterate toward the target condition with PDSAs. If we keep that in play at all times, we're practicing the right pattern. As long as the second coach ensures that we are following those 4 steps, then the process of the coaching these steps provides continuous confirmation that we have alignment and intent within our coaching katas themselves. So that you understand, as shepherds and second coaches, what we're really building upon is this really a starter 5-question card. There's actually 11 questions on it if you count them all up and flip to the back. But the purpose of this starter card gives us the formation of our habits and our thinking patterns. But what we want the shepherds to understand is that you can evolve this thinking pattern behind the questions of the card. If you understand the thinking behind it, you can take it and go off of card in your coaching and then come back onto card. It's like a skeleton or a framework that provides the structure for the kata, so it doesn't become a conversation or a meandering conversation or extra dialogue. And although the frame, go ahead, Beth.
No, I like what you're saying. I was just, to me, this is this is the mental model, right?
Right.
This is the the meta routine. The questions, just, I love that framework, right? That term you're using. It's the framework, but it's a critical framework that we repeat over and over again until it just becomes a habitualized pattern, a way of thinking.
So you're so right. The framework of the questions, when you first start practicing, they may not make logical sequential sense when you're first trying to practice this. After you've practiced the pattern for even a few years, the card, although it's a template, starts to fade kind of in the background, so that the coach can recognize the internal obstacles that are often more daunting than the external ones. But we keep the same mental model and keep the same structure of the card. So if I were a learner or a coach, what would I expect from a shepherding group? Well, just like in the picture there, I wouldn't expect them to continue to give me a fish and let me eat for a day, but teach me how to fish so that I can eat for a lifetime. We want the shepherds to be teaching us, not necessarily giving us the answers. And so some of the expectations that learners and coaches should have is that the shepherds have regular attendance to the coaching kata cycles. That doesn't have to be at every one, but there needs to be a regular attendance and a regular engagement. Shepherds should be aware when I was struggling as a learner or as a coach, or I can't get a PDSA completed on time. Oftentimes before I even realize it, and that they would actually come running to help support me. That they're monitoring, challenging, and encouraging my skill development. They would share related interdepartmental information. One group's working in this area that might be related to lab. This group's working in another area that's also related to labs. Guess what? They both can connect, and that there is some dialogue and interconnectivity between that.
And that's a huge piece in terms of shepherding groups developing, and we talked about earlier in one of the prior webinars, Brandon, a subservient shepherding group to help with that interdepartmental information and sharing, and bring process point kaizen or improvement up to more of a system level by connecting boards in subservient shepherding groups.
Exactly. That's the whole purpose of a TWI job instruction shepherding group, is to make sure that they understand the boards, maybe the CLAPSI board or the CAUTI board or whatever board is related to where we need job instructions. They understand as we start to deploy job instructions and deploy jibs that we're not overloading an area with too many jibs and too much training that is not necessarily going to be effective. So that subservient or that sub-shepherding group has a connection between the overall shepherding group and then also connecting those kata boards that have job instruction as part of their countermeasures. Two other things that we would expect would be celebration. Celebrate when we've learned something new, even if it's a failed PDSA. Celebrate when I overcome an obstacle and achieve a target condition, and especially when I achieve the challenge. There needs to be a big celebration at that point when the group has maintained the working pattern that's producing an outcome metric at a sustained level for 3, 4, 5, 6 months. And we say, we've arrived, we're here. We need to celebrate. I would be expected to be pushed for clarity and provide guidance on obstacles that seem overwhelming. So I may not be addressing as a learner the deeper rooted obstacles. I may not be seeing them, but I should be pushed for driving down for clarity and exploring further and seeing what are those obstacles underneath the surface. The members of the shepherding group will be developing their own coaching and learning skills by regularly practicing. Shepherding groups are performing kata on the kata. So the framework of their sessions should be exactly the same, although the content different and more strategic. It should be practiced on a regular basis. And I would expect to be held accountable to set target conditions beyond my knowledge threshold while improving my target condition attainment as I grow and learn this kata. that we're not staying stagnant, that we're not letting other things get in the way of us being able to be at the board each and every day, at least for that 15-minute cycle. They'd be willing to serve as my second coach or my first coach. I've got a vacation coming up and my coach is going to be out, and my second coach happens to be tied up and can't be here this week as well. I need a shepherd. The kata should not stop. The shepherd who is shepherding that board should be informed in advance so that we continue that cycle. We don't just take a week of vacation off because we don't have a coach here. And if they'd be willing to teach a portion of the kata training as it relates to their area of strength. In other words, maybe help assist Skip with some of the classes that he has in the initial training. Maybe help you and I as we start to develop additional trainings for second coaches and coaching capacity to participate in that and help give us feedback in our teaching methods.
Mm-hmm. Excellent.
So what are the expected behaviors of the shepherding group? How does the shepherding group kata of your kata session happen? Well, number top of those lists there, A, B, and C, there has to be a storyboard. There has to be a learner. There has to be a coach. Someone from the shepherding group needs to be in these two positions, and there has to be a storyboard that's showing the desired working pattern we're trying to achieve with our katas at a certain point in time, and that we're doing our own PDCAs and overcoming the obstacles that are supporting those kata boards. I've even had some coaches on the shepherding groups that go ahead and go through a second coaching cycle during the kata of your kata shepherding group cycle. So even ask, how well are we doing at our own kata? The remaining members, the remaining shepherds, they can act as second coaches during this session as well. When it comes to the question, what obstacles are we facing as a shepherding group, we would expect the other members to speak up as second coaches and bring up obstacles, bring up areas that they've seen where we may not be addressing a certain obstacle preventing us from reaching the target condition. So each group is made up of a ratio of really competent learners and coaches based off the Dreyfus model of skill acquisition. We covered that in the last section, and you see it throughout these videos as far as going from a novice to advanced beginner to competent to proficient to eternal learner. We need a good ratio, a good mix there, and that we have that in play at all times. So there's a hypothesis really behind the shepherding group itself. And the hypothesis is that we really are meeting weekly. We're having a structured dialogue using the card, and we're covering very pertinent items that are really help us, again, with that lower left-hand corner, creating sustained improvement through an engaged organization. While we're having that session, each member is going out and observing. They're playing catch ball with the boards that they're shepherding, and they're bringing back learnings to help the next PDSA to propel the kata, and so that we're going deeper and broader across the organization and addressing specific strategic tactical needs. So we've got alignment from our strategic A3s to our tactical A3s, all the way down through our organization. So why is this a big deal? Why are shepherding groups important? What's at stake for the organization as a whole? Well, Skip has mentioned it in his Baptist Management System video, and Beth and I have experienced this as well. Management systems are fragile, and sustainment is difficult. Conducting and sustaining the shepherding group sessions as well as shepherding the board is hard work. That's because the entropy is constantly working against stagnant systems. It's that second law of thermodynamics that Skip's talked about, that systems want to continue to degrade back into a state of randomness or chaos. It's similar to what his analogy to the car. An automobile at one time at the factory was in all separate pieces. Some manufacturing group put it all together. If you don't upkeep the maintenance and don't rotate your tires and change the oil, it's going to continue to try and come apart. So that's one of the first reasons why this is so important. We have to keep the management system and the kata thinking pattern going forward and growing. It provides strategic alignment, and deployment does not come naturally. We don't naturally play catch ball up and down the organization each and every day. As we mentioned, and It's said several times, Kata and the thinking behind Kata, the thinking pattern lubricates our entire Baptist management system. Experience and psychology show we must change our individual behaviors to create new habits, to create a desired mindset, and it's the organization's collective mindsets that determine the culture. If you'll remember back to some of the second coaching notebook webinars, I talked about if we want to move the culture, we have to have coaches that are coaching people to change from closed mindsets to open mindsets, creating these new habits, this new thinking pattern, and what we're working on are people's individual behaviors. And collectively, that's what moves the culture and what moves us forward.
Yeah, that's so true, Brandon. We're trying to create that open, or what I call adaptive mindset, right? Really
Right.
willing to work beyond their threshold of knowledge and take on challenges that they do not yet know how to achieve. And to do that, to the point number 4, people, want to be creative. And in the Kata, and the way of scientific thinking and acting really teaches people how to be creative, right? We oftentimes think creativity is an innate or a talent you're born with, but the neuroscience and psychology are pretty firm in their understanding that this creativity is a learned trait, is a learned skill, actually.
Sure.
And we need to be creative to drive to great experiments, right? They must have the ability to succeed and the permission to fail. Allowing our Kata practitioners to experiment their way forward really pulls on their creativity. And the shepherding groups are really make that happen. The 5th point, if we do not create a coaching culture, then we will naturally have a command and control culture, which will not move us forward to accomplishing those goals, again, that are beyond our threshold of knowledge, right? We don't know how to implement our way to that achievement. We have to experiment. We have to pull on that creativity, which means we have to coach people to it.
Exactly. If we're not using that coaching culture, if we're not moving our mindset toward that, then what we're going to do is in point 6, if we fail to foster this new thinking pattern, then we'll not only struggle to achieve those challenges that are beyond our knowledge threshold, beyond what we think we can achieve, but we'll also lose those early gains. I've seen many groups come out of the gate, the first 2 or 3 months, they're still rotating through learner, coach, second coach, and they're making huge gains only to not have been shepherded properly or not formed a shepherding group at some organizations that I've worked at, and those gains start to erode. They start to go back and entropy sets in, and we see what point 1 happens. Accomplishing challenges is great, fantastic, but it's also fleeting and unsustainable. We can get to the challenge, we can show that we sustained it for several months, but that's fleeting and unsustainable, because what's behind Kata and what the shepherds should be doing is improving the skill of the learner with new patterns of thinking to accomplish these challenges. That's what we're trying to drive home, is this new learner thinking pattern. Challenges, it's the key to breaking the paradigm. We can reach these new heights of performance, and we can only reach that if we're doing these things we've talked about on this slide. Creating alignment for the deployment, moving the culture, practicing being creative, practicing with permission to fail forward, developing that coaching culture, and then achieving those challenges and moving beyond what we think we can achieve.
Right. It's 2 sides of the same coin, right?
Yep.
On the one side, we want to achieve the challenges, but on the other side, it's learning a new pattern, developing a skill, right? And those two are joined together, fused together. And we really need to develop the skill to achieve the challenges. And that's where we'll actually create sustained improvement through that engaged organization.
Exactly. Good analogy, good picture. So what are some questions or issues shepherding groups may address as we're starting to move forward, and we're learning, and Beth's learning, I'm learning, all of our coaches are learning more and more about these overarching shepherding groups and these subset shepherding groups. Things you're going to be looking at are, what is needed to expand into second shift, or how do we extend this across the weekend shift? Those are experiments and challenges probably within themselves.
Yeah,
What
I get asked the second question. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I get asked the second question quite often, right? What is the right ratio of coaches? You know, how many coaches should we have? Where should they be? And I think that leads right to the third one as well.
Exactly. The ratio of second coaches, how many of those should we have in the organization? That's going to be different for each organization. It's going to be dependent on what is the strength of your first coaches, as we talked about earlier in some of these webinars. Once someone's able to not only be aware of it, but able to do it, are they able to coach it? How many of those people actually can go out and coach it? That's really more the determining factor. And the ratio could be different from one entity to the next entity. How many katas can a shepherd support? I've got that question asked several times. Kind of a rule of thumb is I say try 2 or 3 different kata boards. It's going to be dependent on your position, where you're at, and what your daily job responsibilities. And like you had said, Beth, driving that wedge in there for those 15 minutes. I've suggested to some groups, you know, if you're going to shepherd 3 boards, maybe there's one that's strong that you only see once a week. The other 2 you do on a Monday, Wednesday, Friday, or a Tuesday, Thursday rotation. So you're only at 2 at any one given day, or some formula that helps you get through your month of rotation, some standard practice or standard work as a shepherd.
Right. That's why the shepherding groups really have to know how to assess skill.
Right.
It's not just the people who show up every day that don't need, you know, to be coached. It's the people from a shepherding standpoint who are really doing great experimentation, great learning, you know, really embedding that scientific way of thinking and acting and following the mental model. Those people, those practitioners, competent, may not need as much shepherding. So a shepherd has to know how to assess that skill to make that determination.
Exactly.
And I think this next one is where we're doing some great experimentation, is how do we think about cross-functional storyboards? Putting together a scheduling group with a pre-reg group, with a insurance verification and patient pre-reg and admissions and billing, and how those various functional departments relate to each other, and putting a shepherding group in around those cross-functional storyboards. That's some great experimentation going on out in the Baptist world.
Absolutely. And how we think about that going forward is critical. And the shepherds have to come to an understanding that that's not an easy thing to do, that takes some deeper thought and planning to get these cross-functional boards going. Point 6, 7, and 8, Group A can't find the time. Coach A continues to want to tell and direct the learner what to do. Administrator A is busy, so how does he or she get practice developing coaching skills? Those are areas that the shepherding group has to consider. Just because someone's at administrator level, you know, administrator A, we can't just throw them out there on a board and say, go shepherd. They need to experience that, as we've said, the learner, first coach, second coach role. So how do we get that person that practice, and where do we find that? As far as those 6 and 7, the bottom note there, finding and making time and conducting the coaching kata cycle, that's not really the issue. We'll never find the time, and we can't make time. We can rearrange things. Time is time. It's 168 hours per week, and it's constantly passing. Sand through the hourglass. It's prioritization and discipline. That's what separates successful learners and coaches from unsuccessful ones. Are they able to drive that wedge into the day and get past that tipping point that Beth talked about in her 5 points of key factors? Kata is the diet and exercise of the healthy organization. So we've given many tools and talked about many tools. The shepherding group would have their own shepherding Kata board that would be measuring the metrics and measuring target conditions. How close to the challenge are we at? We talked about the PDSA coaching and cycles tracking record as a tool to help us understand from a shepherding group standpoint, where do my learners and coaches, where have they been spending their time? If I'm going in investigating a board and it's struggling, what time is being spent on reflection or spent on the experiment or actually spent on the 5 questions? The skill assessment, as Beth said, can be done in parts and pieces over a month. It's a tool, but don't let the tools replace the thinking. It's the thinking pattern that we're trying to embed and get innate into our learners and coaches. The quote down there, the tools are just countermeasures to business problems that Toyota has faced, and that they will be used only until better countermeasures are found. We hope to evolve many of these tools and many of these forms into other tools that may help you even more. And that's one thing that the shepherds are going to need to be a part of. They're going to need to foster that thinking style and that thinking pattern to say, what do we need to enable and help this group go forward, so that we can be creating sustained improvement through an engaged organization, which is the theme of all of these webinars.
Excellent.
So with that, we come to the conclusion of our 3-part series of shepherding groups and how to kata your kata. Hopefully you understand better now how to create sustained improvement through an engaged organization. And as always, Beth, we always want everyone throughout the organizations that we coach to help show us their thinking, right?
Absolutely. Show us your thinking, and your feedback and comments are welcome. And as we continue to move forward with additional webinars on other topics, or if we could revisit this one in the future as we learn more, I'm looking forward to it, Brandon.
Absolutely. I am as well. Thanks, Beth.
Thank you.